Hey, what's up everyone? Before we dive into this absolute chaos, I need your help real quick. We're pushing hard to hit that 1,000 subscriber milestone, and honestly, every single subscription makes a massive difference. If you're vibing with the content, hit that subscribe button right now. It takes 2 seconds and helps us keep bringing you the realest breakdowns in sports. Alright, let's get into it. The moment Shedeur Sanders' name gets dropped, Coach Mangini goes absolutely nuclear. This isn't some polite sports debate where everyone nods and agrees to disagree. No, this is a full-scale demolition. Chris Broussard's sitting there trying to keep things civilized, but Mangini didn't show up for tea and crumpets. He showed up to burn the Cleveland Browns' entire operation to the ground, and that's exactly what he did. The way he dismantled their decision-making process wasn't just criticism, it was a masterclass in exposing organizational dysfunction on live television. The Browns tried selling everyone on this idea that drafting Shedeur at 5th overall was somehow part of some brilliant master plan. They talked about process, about having the right people in the room, about making calculated decisions. Andrew Berry stood there with his chest out talking about good value at pick 146, acting like they had everything figured out. But Mangini saw right through it. He didn't buy a single word of that carefully crafted narrative, and he made sure everyone watching knew it too. What makes this whole situation even more fascinating is how Mangini approached his critique. He didn't come in screaming or ranting like some hot take artist desperate for clicks. That's not his style. Instead, he delivered his points with this calm, surgical precision that made every word hit twice as hard. When someone speaks that calmly while completely eviscerating your organization, you know they're not just throwing stones. They're speaking facts, and the facts are devastating. According to Mangini, the real issue isn't Shedeur Sanders at all. The kid can play, everyone knows that. The problem is the Browns themselves, this franchise that somehow manages to turn every opportunity into an organizational nightmare. They've got this pattern of overthinking simple decisions, of letting too many voices into the room until nobody actually knows who's making the final call. It's like watching a group project where everyone claims they did the work, but somehow the final presentation is still a disaster. Think about what actually happened here for a second. Shedeur Sanders was universally recognized as one of the most polished, game-ready quarterbacks in the entire draft class. The kid has everything you want: arm talent, football IQ, leadership presence, competitive fire. He's been dissecting defenses since he was old enough to read a playbook. Yet somehow the Browns let 4 other teams pick before they finally pulled the trigger. 4 teams. That's not strategy, that's hesitation disguised as patience. Mangini made it crystal clear that this delay had nothing to do with Shedeur's talent level, and everything to do with the Browns trying to look smarter than they actually are. They wanted everyone to think they were playing chess while the rest of the league played checkers. Instead, they outsmarted themselves into a situation so awkward it needs its own therapist. Jimmy Haslam and Andrew Berry sat there spinning tales about development and fit and organizational philosophy, dropping buzzwords like they were going out of style, but Mangini wasn't having any of it. The way Mangini described it, the Browns' entire draft strategy looked like something pieced together from YouTube highlights and locker room gossip instead of actual football evaluation. They got so caught up in controlling the narrative and managing perceptions that they forgot the most important part: actually making good decisions. And that's what makes this whole thing so frustrating for people who actually understand football. Shedeur Sanders isn't some developmental project or raw talent that needs years of coaching. He's ready right now. What really stood out during Mangini's breakdown was how he highlighted the disconnect between what the Browns say publicly and what's actually happening behind closed doors. Haslam comes out after the draft talking about how it wasn't his decision, how Andrew Berry made the call, how they had the right people involved in the conversation. But why is the owner even saying that? What purpose does it serve to distance himself from a draft pick 3 months after the fact? It's bizarre behavior that raises more questions than it answers. The whole situation reeks of an organization that doesn't know how to function as a unified front. You've got the owner throwing the GM under the bus, the coaching staff getting 0 first-team reps for their 5th overall pick, and a front office that apparently debates major decisions the morning of the draft. That's not how professional organizations operate. That's how dysfunctional families argue about where to go for dinner, except the stakes here involve millions of dollars and a franchise's future. Mangini didn't just call out the organizational chaos though. He went deeper, questioning the fundamental competence of the people making these decisions. When you really break down what he was saying, the message becomes clear. The Browns don't have a Shedeur Sanders problem. They have a leadership problem. They have a decision-making problem. They have a competence problem. And until they fix those issues, it doesn't matter who they draft because they'll find a way to mess it up regardless. The comparison Mangini drew was particularly brutal. He essentially painted a picture of a front office that wouldn't recognize elite quarterback talent if it walked up and threw a perfect spiral right into their hands. And the evidence backs him up. This is the same organization that cycled through dozens of starting quarterbacks over the past 2 decades, never quite finding the right guy. Now they've got a quarterback sitting in their building who could be the answer, and they're treating him like he's some kind of puzzle they need to solve instead of the solution they've been desperately searching for. What makes this even more painful for Browns fans is watching how other organizations handle their quarterback situations. When teams identify their guy, they don't hesitate. They don't overthink it. They build around him immediately and give him every opportunity to succeed. But Cleveland operates in this constant state of second-guessing themselves, always looking for reasons why something won't work instead of figuring out how to make it work. It's exhausting to watch and even more exhausting to experience as a fan. The fear factor Mangini identified is probably the most accurate diagnosis of what's really going on. The Browns are terrified of being wrong again. They've been wrong so many times, made so many mistakes at the quarterback position, that now they're paralyzed by the possibility of another failure. So instead of trusting their evaluation and committing fully to Shedeur, they're hedging their bets and keeping their options open. But that kind of tentative, half-committed approach is exactly how you guarantee failure. Shedeur Sanders didn't ask to be drafted by Cleveland. He didn't lobby for this situation or campaign to wear orange and brown. The Browns made the decision to select him to invest a top 5 pick in his future. Now they have a responsibility to either go all in or get out of the way. Keeping him on the sideline while giving first team reps to guys who clearly aren't at his level does nothing but waste everyone's time and delay the inevitable. The practice reports tell the whole story if you're paying attention. Every single account from training camp has Shedeur outperforming the competition. His accuracy is better, his decision making is faster, his command of the offense is more advanced. He's doing everything you could possibly ask a rookie quarterback to do, checking every box, exceeding expectations. Yet the coaching staff continues treating this like it's some difficult decision that requires endless deliberation. Mangini's frustration with this situation is completely justified because it represents everything wrong with how some NFL franchises operate. They get so caught up in politics and optics and managing personalities that they lose sight of the simple truth. Winning football games requires putting your best players on the field. It's not complicated. Shedeur gives them the best chance to win right now. Therefore, Shedeur should be starting. End of discussion. The damage this situation does goes beyond just this season too. Players around the league are watching how Cleveland handles this. Future free agents are taking notes. Other young quarterbacks are seeing how the Browns treat their draft picks. If you're a talented player looking at where to sign or which team to play for, why would you choose an organization that can't even commit to their own first-round picks? Why would you trust a front office that seems more interested in covering their backs than building a winner? What's particularly maddening is that the Browns actually did the hard part. They identified the right guy, they made the pick, they got their franchise quarterback. All they have to do now is the easy part, play him. But somehow they've managed to turn the simplest decision in football into a months-long saga filled with drama and uncertainty. It would be impressive if it wasn't so utterly frustrating. The collusion theories that have started floating around only make this situation more suspicious. Multiple teams needed quarterbacks in that draft. Multiple franchises could have used someone with Shedeur's talent and pedigree, yet he kept sliding down the board despite clearly being one of the best players available. Whether there was an actual coordinated effort to avoid drafting him or just a shared reluctance among certain owners, the result is the same. Shedeur ended up in a situation where the organization that picked him doesn't seem fully committed to him. Haslam's public comments about not wanting to draft Shedeur are particularly damaging in that context. Imagine being a young player, hearing the owner of your team tell the world he didn't want you there. How is that supposed to make anyone feel motivated or supported? How does that help build the kind of relationship between ownership and player that successful franchises are built on? It doesn't. It creates resentment and uncertainty and all the toxic elements that lead to dysfunction. The way Andrew Barry looked on draft day tells its own story. He didn't have the expression of a GM who just landed his guy. He looked uncomfortable, almost resigned, like someone going through motions they didn't fully believe in. When you combine that visual with Haslam's later comments about the decision being Barry's call, the picture becomes even clearer. This wasn't a unified organizational decision where everyone bought in completely. This was a compromise at best, a power struggle at worst. Mangini recognizes all of this because he's been around the league long enough to know how functional organizations operate versus how dysfunctional ones spiral. He's seen what happens when ownership, management, and coaching all pull in the same direction with clear communication and shared goals. He's also seen what happens when those groups work against each other, when everyone's covering their own interests instead of doing what's best for the team. Cleveland right now looks a lot more like the latter than the former. The quarterback room dynamics add another layer of complexity to this whole mess. When you've got 4 quarterbacks on the roster and the clear best one isn't getting first team reps, what message does that send to everyone? The other quarterbacks know Shedeur's better. The offensive linemen know it. The receivers know it. The entire roster knows it. So why is the coaching staff the last group to figure it out? It creates this weird tension where everyone's going through the motions of competition while knowing the outcome should be obvious. Shedeur himself has handled this situation with remarkable maturity and professionalism. He hasn't complained publicly, hasn't demanded anything, hasn't created drama. He just shows up every day and does the work, proving his worth through performance rather than politics. That kind of approach should be rewarded by an organization, not ignored. Instead, the Browns seem almost suspicious of how ready he is, like they can't believe a rookie could actually be this polished this quickly. The comparison to how other franchises have handled similar situations is stark. When teams draft a quarterback in the top 5, they typically have a plan for getting him on the field as soon as possible. They might give him a few weeks to learn the system, maybe let him observe from the sideline for a handful of games. But by mid-season at the latest, that guy is playing. The Browns are acting like Shedeur needs years of development when he's clearly more advanced than most rookies on day 1. Mangini's broader point about organizational culture hits at something deeper than just this one decision. The Browns have created an environment where indecision is mistaken for thoroughness, where endless deliberation is confused with wisdom. They think they're being careful and methodical, but really they're just scared to commit. That kind of culture seeps into everything, affecting player development, coaching decisions, free agency, all of it. Until they fix that fundamental issue, they'll keep making the same mistakes over and over. The fans see it all playing out in real time, and they're absolutely fed up with it. Browns supporters have endured decades of incompetence, watched countless quarterbacks come and go, suffered through rebuilds that never actually build anything. Now they finally have a quarterback prospect worth getting excited about, and the organization is finding ways to mess that up too. The frustration isn't just about Shedeur specifically, it's about the pattern of dysfunction that never seems to change regardless of who's in charge. What happens next will define this regime's legacy one way or another. If they continue holding Shedeur back and the season becomes another lost year, the criticism will be deafening. If they finally commit to him and he struggles, at least they can say they gave their first round pick a real chance. But if they keep him on the bench while he's clearly ready and some other quarterback leads them to a mediocre record, that decision will haunt them forever. The stakes couldn't be higher, yet somehow the Browns seem oblivious to the pressure. Mangini's willingness to call this out publicly matters because it gives voice to what so many people in and around the league are thinking privately. Nobody wants to be the first to say the emperor has no clothes, but once someone does, everyone else feels free to acknowledge the obvious truth. The Browns aren't operating like a competent NFL franchise. They're operating like an amateur organization that somehow stumbled into professional football without actually understanding how it works. The real tragedy in all of this is that Shedeur Sanders deserves better. He's worked his entire life to get to this point, developed his craft through countless hours of practice and film study, proven himself at every level. Now he's finally in the NFL, and instead of being celebrated and supported, he's caught in the middle of organizational politics that have nothing to do with him. It's not fair to him, and it's not fair to Browns fans who've waited so long for a quarterback to believe in. Looking at the big picture, this situation represents a critical moment for the Cleveland Browns franchise. They can either learn from this experience, recognize their mistakes, and adjust their approach going forward, or they can double down on the dysfunction, keep making excuses, and waste yet another opportunity to build something sustainable. Based on their history, betting on positive change feels optimistic, but maybe, just maybe, the national criticism and fan pressure will force them to finally get it right. The contrast between how Shedeur's handled this situation and how the organization has handled it couldn't be more stark. He's been everything you want from a young quarterback: humble, hardworking, focused, mature. Meanwhile, the Browns have been everything you don't want from a franchise: indecisive, defensive, contradictory, chaotic. If this were a test of character and competence, Shedeur would pass with flying colors while the organization would fail spectacularly. Mangini's commentary will age either very well or very poorly depending on what happens from here. If Shedeur eventually gets his shot and dominates like many expect, Mangini looks like a prophet who saw the obvious while everyone else was blind. If somehow things don't work out, then the Browns get to say they were right to be cautious. But based on everything we've seen so far, betting against Shedeur seems foolish. The kid has proven himself at every turn, exceeded expectations constantly. There's no logical reason to doubt him at this point. What this whole saga really comes down to is a question of trust. Do the Browns trust their own evaluation? Do they trust the process that led them to select Shedeur 5th overall? Do they trust him to handle the pressure and responsibility of being their starting quarterback? So far, all signs point to no. They don't trust themselves, they don't trust their process, and they don't trust him. That lack of trust will poison everything if they don't address it soon. The path forward seems obvious to everyone except the people making the decisions. Start Shedeur Sanders, give him the first team reps, build the offense around his strengths, support him publicly and privately. Let him develop through actual game experience rather than endless practice. It's not rocket science. It's basic quarterback development that every successful franchise understands. But for Cleveland, even the simple stuff seems impossibly complicated. If the Browns continue down this path of hesitation and half measures, they'll look back on this moment as a massive missed opportunity. They had a chance to get it right, to finally break their quarterback curse, to build around a talented young player who wanted to be great for them. Instead, they got in their own way, let fear and politics override good football sense, and turned a potential strength into another source of drama and dysfunction. That's the Cleveland Browns way, unfortunately. Here's hoping they prove everyone wrong and figure it out before it's too late.